All right. What's up, everybody? How we doing? Happy Monday, August 19th. Hope everyone had a good weekend. So here we are live. We are live on YouTube. If you are going to be tuning into the live here, let me know where you're coming in from in the world in the comment section. Let me know where you're coming in from. If you're watching this live, you can throw in your name, throw in what city, country you are watching from. I'm so happy to have you guys here. Always New York, eh? Always New York, upstate New York, along the Hudson River. I love that movie. What is that movie, Sully, about the guy who landed the plane in the Hudson River? I think what is it with Tom Hanks that played Sully? I actually just rewatched that movie recently, and it's a really cool story. The one with like I think it was pigeons that went in the engine in both engines, so both engines died because of the pigeons. Let's face it, you guys, pigeons. It's really good. Sully, I think it's on Netflix, but let's face it, pigeons are rats in the sky. Pigeons are fucking useless. I have pigeons that are constantly having sex out of my patio here. So like I just have looked up online, like I've seen like pigeon orgies on my patio here. And just so I know in detailed fashion how pigeons mate, which is not something that you want to know. But anyways, these pigeons went in the engines of this plane that was flying to from New York to I think Newark, New Jersey. And then, anyways, the engine stopped working and then had to glide the plane right into the Hudson River. Real life story, and Tom Hanks plays a character. So, you guys, welcome to my live here. We are going to be talking about Sacred Union, all things Sacred Union, preparing for Sacred Union, like what the preparation for Sacred Union is like, how you know when you're on the Sacred Union timeline, how you can differentiate between a sacred union paradigm dynamic versus more of a karmic spiritual relationship dynamic. And I'm going to talk about what I think a lot of people who are in sort of the spiritual space get wrong about this topic. Maybe that's where we'll start this live. And so, guys, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, anything you find interesting that you want to just comment in the comment section, I eventually want to have these where they're more discussions rather than my ugly ass fucking face just sitting here talking nonstop. So just feel free to ask a question. Feel free to engage. That's eventually what these are going to be. Is they're going to be more of a discussion eventually because I love hearing from you guys and I love engaging in this discussion. But I think the first thing and the way that I'm going to enter sort of this topic of sacred union is a couple of things. I think we'll discuss like what is sacred union and then what I think a lot of people get wrong in the industry. So I guess it's only natural that we'll start of like what is sacred union. And so obviously this is my YouTube live here. And so I'm going to tell you guys what I feel my interpretation of sacred union is. And you'll probably hear some different iterations and semblances of what people perceive sacred union to be. So the way that I kind of see this is that we've evolved relationally, right? Over the years, we've evolved relationally. Only in the past, let's say 10, 15 years, things sort of like conscious relationship, things like polarity dynamics, masculine, feminine energy. I mean, these things have been around for a long time, but let's say they've kind of just embedded more into sort of the public or collective consciousness, right? There was Helen and Harville Hendricks, doing the Imago therapy. And so there's all these different types of kind of conscious relating that's really sort of come into the space. And so, conscious relationships was a really big deal for a while, right? Where people would go to therapy, people would actually begin to make the unconscious conscious to understand that we're replaying dynamics from early childhood, from our family out in relationships. I think these, for a lot of people, this is even just the paradigm that they're in is like learning, oh, okay, so I actually replay things that happened with my parents. I replay pre-verbal early attachment wounds, different roles that I played in the family. This all shows up in relationships. And I think for a lot of people, this is where they're at, is kind of working through these pieces. And let's face it, we're always going to be working on this type of shit, right? We're always going to be working on this type of stuff of how our family of origin and the role that we played in our family of origin influences and creates this imprint in our body for how we show up relationally, romantic relationships. Family and romantic relationships are the number one and two, the top two places where karma gets replayed, because they're the places where attachment is the most present, right? So conscious relationships, right? Which is where people really started to become conscious over their shadow, conscious over their wounding, all these different things. And then there were things like we're learning about, am I my masculine? Am I my feminine? Am I a man who has a masculine core, but I'm operating more in my feminine? Am I a woman who has more of a feminine core, but I'm operating in more of my protected masculine? So these things started to embed more into the collective consciousness, right? Where we're starting to do relationships more consciously, right? Way back in the day, relationships were very traditional. And then we started to move more into this idea of conscious relationships. A man leads, a woman's more in sort of her submissive, sort of surrendering to the masculine, more of this polarity dynamic. And so relationships and the work around relationships started to evolve, right? And so what I feel really, really happened, and I feel personally that the pandemic was a huge catalyst and initiator for this, because the pandemic created a space where we were all going through so many different quantum timeline jumps in a really small amount of time, not only at an individual level, but also at like a collective global level. We were going through all these not attachment, sorry, but these timeline jumps, right? And so what I felt this happened was it started to create this sort of different type of relational paradigm in sort of the ether and sort of the collective sort of consciousness, right? And so this brings me to my point. So you look at conscious relationships, you look at polarity dynamics. I look at conscious relationships as very much a psychology-based relational framework, right? You think about going to therapy and, working with your inner child and dealing with the mother wound and father wound. It feels very psychology-based, right? Polarity dynamics, a little bit sexier, it's all about polarity and magnetism and sexual attraction and actually being operating in your sexual pole, right? And then you look at sacred union, which is a much more spiritual concept to relationships. So this brings me to like, what is sacred union? Ultimately, the way it can be perceived, I think many ways, is the ultimate spiritual relationship, the ultimate container for transformation within a relationship. So sacred union is very much what a lot of the spiritual community, people who are really on sort of these spiritual journeys, will see as the end goal, right? As sort of this holy grail of relationship, right? Whereas if you're in a more of a psychology track, it would be conscious relationship, it would be codependency, these would be some of the terms that you would use. And so I see conscious relationship is kind of here, and now we're moving into even a higher realm of consciousness relationally, which is sacred union. And I would say it really is associated and used a lot more in spiritual communities. And I don't know if you guys are aware, you're online and you can tell when someone's more spiritual versus someone's much more like psychology based, right? They're kind of these two different lanes. And you would look at kind of conscious relationship or even just polarity dynamics as much more of that psychology based. I kind of see it as conscious relationship, and polarity is kind of like a bridge. Polarity is kind of a bridge to sacred union. Conscious relationship, then we evolve a little bit and we get a lot more interested into polarity, because we're moving a little bit more into the space of energetics. And then we get into a space of sacred union, which to me is actually really, really biblical. It's very, this higher ascension and communion with God. If you're in a relationship and you're in a Christian relationship, they will have it as a triangle, where it's two people here. And I know this because I've been in a serious relationship with a Christian woman where there's two people and the triangle is God, right? And so the relationship funnels through the energetics of God, right? And so, but in a religious framework, that would be an actual deity. It would actually be Jesus. And then if you're in a more spiritual relationship, it's just like energy, it's source frequency, it's just universal energy in God, right? So relationships sort of progressed, right? And so sacred union is like the ultimate type of spiritual manifestation of relationship. And I think it's important because what we're all looking for, whether conscious or unconscious, even if you're not a spiritual person, we're looking for a spiritual experience in relationships. We're looking to have some type of spiritual experience, right? But the problem is that most people compartmentalize this and they don't really have any spirituality in their life. And then they unconsciously or consciously use relationship as sort of spiritual salvation. The one place they can have this ethereal yet grounded experience, right? This spiritual relational experience. And so most people, unfortunately, which is not what we want to do, use relationship as the only place for this, right? And so something that people get wrong a lot, and this is my opinion in the sort of spiritual communities, is they see things like twin flames as sacred union. They see things as twin flames as the highest ascension of relationship, right? Because you're seeing a mirror image of your own soul, right? But I actually see twin flames as catalysts that become necessary ruptures to prepare us for sacred union. So I feel most of the spiritual community actually gets tripped up in what I call karmic spiritual relationships. And most of the spiritual community will call sacred union or divine union these very karmic dynamics of these twin flames, of these different relationships where you were lovers in a past life. And in the work that I teach, and my philosophy to sacred union is we actually need to have a rupture here. We actually need to have a rupture in that past life sort of relationship, or that, twin flame, or that very, very sort of karmic relationship. So sacred union is the highest form of a spiritual relationship, right? It's essentially an experience where you're in a triangle, where there's God and then both of you are here. And it's not religious in any way. It's all energetic. It's all in the flow of energy. It's all about being in our power. I feel that most people in the spiritual community mistake things like twin flames as this paradigm of sacred union, or relationships that are very sort of karmic in nature, right? And I actually see these karmic relationships, or these twin flames, as a breeding ground and catalyst to excavate parts of our shadow to ultimately prepare us for the timeline of sacred union, right? So this karmic relationship, or this twin flame, because you'll often find times with when we're moving into our own divine timeline, or moving into a relationship with God, or moving into the divine, our own power, often it does require a very significant relational attachment rupture. Means being in some type of relationship that you thought was it and not having it work out. I've been in this work for a while, and this is something that I've seen through and through again. That's a really, really common theme with a lot of people that are meant to kind of come into union with God and come into the God timeline and sort of this divine realm, is we have to have a relationship that we thought was the liberation, but it really was the greatest catalyst to bring us on to the God timeline. So the sacred union timeline happens when you move onto your own individual God timeline. So you move on to your own individual God timeline. It's a sacred union timeline. It's the same thing, right? So as we prepare for sacred union, oftentimes we have to experience a very significant relational attachment rupture, meaning some situation that replicates something really deep pre-verbal, some real pre-verbal attachment bonding that is being replicated in this relationship. So it's very of the earth, right? It's very much in the psychology realm that we're experiencing a certain attachment that replicates something from our own early infancy and pre-verbal, but it also holds this massive attachment in the spirit realm. So when you think of twin flames, you guys, or you think of highly charged karmic relationships, where you have like a really, really deep soul connection, like you have a crazy spiritual connection. You're like, the attraction is insane. The energy is wild. Like there's so much energy, right? And so oftentimes we have to experience this and experience a rupture in this type of union before we even start to prepare for sacred union. But most people in this work see this sort of twin flame or this soul recognition as sacred union. And my belief that when we have this relationship, it actually means we're not even on the sacred union timeline yet. And so this relationship, this twin flame relationship, it's revealing a big time attachment in both past life and the ancestral quantum realm. So those two pieces. So now when we experience a karmic spiritual relationship, we're experiencing deep early attachment from our lifetime, something pre-verbal, and we're experiencing a deep attachment in the ancestral realm, means something in our family lineage, a deep ingrained karmic pattern of how the masculine and the feminine lineages kind of work together, as well as something from past lives. And so all those things together, it fuels that we see this person as our soul recognition, as our ultimate deliverance, that this person is going to bring me into the stratosphere of my liberated and unlimited potential, right? So we put so much sort of stakes and pressure on the deliverance of this relationship, right? And what happens in this relationship is it feels like we're fighting upstream to make it work, right? Because there's a lot of energy in this relationship, but we can't necessarily hold it in reality. So one reason or one way we know we're in sort of this karmic relationship, which is a necessary precursor for sacred union or the sacred union timeline, is we're in a really potent spiritual connection that we struggle to make work in the earthly realm. There's constant obstacles, challenges. We're kind of living for this one day someday. One day someday we'll get to this place where we can have some ease, where things can be easier, and it seems like we're coming up to the same old problems that we're just not able to heal. We're just looping and looping in the same things. And so typically what happens in a very karmic spiritual relationship is we're meeting someone who has a lot of the inverse of our trauma. We're meeting someone who has the inverse of our trauma, and there's so much ground that we have to cover to make it work. There's so much ground that we have to cover to make it work. And it's challenging because we have a really, really potent soul connection. We really vibrate on the spiritual plane, on sort of the astral plane, that we really, really vibe. Like our souls in many ways are meant to dance together. But what happens in these karmic relationships is the soul connection isn't able to land and ground in the practical, physical, earthly body, right? And so the relationship is very higher dimensional. It's very, very higher dimensional. And so what this soul relationship, this twin flame, or this karmic spiritual relationship is doing, and this is getting to me as we start working towards the sacred sort of union timeline and paradigm, what it's doing is this relationship is helping to retrieve aspects of your soul. It's helping to excavate aspects of your shadow that need to come to the surface. It's helping to excavate different sort of wounds and traumas from past lives and the ancestral realm, and different attachment from these different times that are in the way of your own soul landing and integrating in your physical body here on earth. And so we see this relationship as the salvation. And this is why the relationship, why we loop, why it always feels like we're fighting uphill, why it feels like there's constant obstacles, why there's a lot of push and pull, why there's a lot of contention, why there's a lot of conflict. It's like there's a lot of conflict, and we're waiting for the time in the relationship where we can actually help one another heal, right? And it never seems to come, this one day someday. So what this is doing is it's revealing a connection in sort of this very higher vibrational plane that can't land here down on earth. And so what the rupture of this relationship and this connection does is it plays a part in allowing our soul to land and ground in the physical earthly body. It catalyzes, and this is why I see twin flames not as sacred union, but as catalysts that prepare us for the sacred union timeline. And most people, I would say, going towards a little bit more of the ungrounded spiritual community, views twin flames as the ultimate salvation. I see it as a term that I call spiritual codependence, where we're looking for a relationship before we found a level of spiritual sovereignty on our own, right? Again, the reason why twin flames are so attractive is they're the ultimate, what we feel, spiritual relational experience. But really what it's doing is just revealing the deepest possible threads of our ego and our codependency in our body. It's revealing the deepest possible threads of spiritual ego and spiritual codependence from past lives and the ancestral realm, right? And this is why we fight against these relationships not working out, because we see this as our deliverance. We see this as our happy ending. We see this as like, a romance novel that you pick up and be inspired by. And so we want this at like a spiritual ego sense so badly. But really what it's doing is it's revealing every sort of blind spot. It's revealing every sort of blind spot that we have, all the ways that we're ultimately looking to be saved spiritually in some sense, the ways that we're looking to be delivered in some way. And so when we experience a rupture from here, now we're experiencing an attachment rupture from early infancy, something pre-verbal in our lifetime, and an attachment rupture from a past life or in the ancestral realm. So what's actually happening is we're having to let go from our life and other lifetimes put together. So that's why it's such a big rupture. It's such a big rupture. And then it feels like you're lost. It feels like you don't know what's happening. Everything you thought was true is not true. And again, the reason why I bring this up, because this whole piece is about preparing for sacred union. And this attachment rupture is often, not always, this attachment rupture may show up in a different form, or it may not happen in this acute way. But I'd say 75% of the time, this attachment rupture happens with people who are really, really meant to come into union with God and the divine timeline. And the reason being, you guys, is because it's essentially teaching us to become our own sovereign container, our own balance of masculine and feminine energy, right? Our own course correction of karma in past life and the ancestral realm, to go root chakra to crown chakra, earth and sky, in our own body. So as we experience the rupture of this relationship, now we start to descend more of our soul into our body. We start to descend more of our soul in our body. This is actually where the divine really, really begins, right? The divine, the rupture that we feel is the end of our spirituality is actually just the beginning of it. And we realize all the ways that we were operating in spiritual ego and spiritual codependency. So I'll tell you this, guys, when people are preaching twin flames, they're preaching spiritual ego and spiritual codependence. It doesn't mean twin flames can't work, but they most often don't. And the reason why twin flames most often don't work is because they come at a time in our life when one or both people are not ready for the energy in this relationship, right? So twin flames hold a lot of energy, and it's a very spiritually advanced container. When I say spiritually advanced, means there's so much energy in this type of container. And the reason why they don't work is they usually come at a time in our life that's helping prepare us for the sacred union timeline. We're not actually ready for sacred union, but they're helping prepare us for the timeline. And so we know meeting this container with all this energy is helping prepare us for the sacred union timeline. And so we can't hold this relationship, right? And this is where the struggle is that we're fighting against timelines. So in a twin flame, you were probably lovers in some timeline, and you're experiencing the energy of that timeline from an ancient timeline. You're experiencing it here on earth, but the energy is so potent and powerful, you're not able to hold it at this particular trajectory point of ascension for one or both of you. And most often the case when a twin flame comes, we're not actually ready. And that's actually on purpose. It's actually on purpose because this container is trying to pull. It's trying to pull all this ancient material that we need to integrate to come into our ancient individual power, right? And so most often they're catalysts. And so the reason why we're fighting so hard to make something work is because we're fighting against our timeline. We're fighting against the truth of some timeline that is trying to be born within us here on earth. Some timeline that is trying to be born within us here on earth. And so here's the thing, you guys, about sacred union. You experience the attachment rupture. Again, it might not be the case, but maybe you do. You experience the attachment rupture, which replicates the earliest sort of imprint of bonding with mom and dad, along with the ancient material of some timeline in an ancestral realm or in a past life. And it all goes, and you're like, what the fuck? And what it's doing is it's asking you to claim all aspects of your shadow. Everywhere that you outsourced your power, everywhere that you are not operating in your own sovereign container to your own communion with God. And so we think about sacred union. Sacred union timeline opens up when we really, really start to move onto this individual path of wholeness, where and so through this attachment rupture, you begin to reorient your container with God, meaning you're beginning to reorient your energetic field, your energetic system, and your attachment system with that of source energy, which is the process of preparing for the triangle of sacred union, right? Preparing for the triangle of sacred union. And this is a very advanced sort of spiritual container that we find. And you see so many people talking about sacred union online. And, some people have this type of container. There's a lot of people that probably have some microcosm of this container because this is a very new emerging framework, a very new emerging paradigm, right? This is something that in sort of the form of consciousness that we're moving into, it's at the cutting edge, right? And so everyone's sort of preaching, my sacred union, and everyone wants to think they're in a sacred union, but it's probably some microcosm where we haven't really reoriented to God. So if we're really talking about sacred union, it requires your system to totally reorient to God, which means to dispel all fear in your body that is getting in the way of you moving on to sort of this holy God timeline in your life. And so this rupture is often a very necessary precursor to bring up the deepest fear in your body that is not allowing you to move into that communion with God. And so when you think of preparing for sacred union, it's all about where are we not whole in our life? Where are we not balanced in our masculine, feminine energy, right? This is why I'm really not a fan of polarity, because what's more important than polarity is our wholeness, right? Because in a relationship, and that's why the sacred union template is even a higher form than just polarity dynamics, because now we're actually dealing with polarity in terms of the energetics of God and how the polarity and the energetics of God are actually going to help to harmonize and recenter and rebalance energy as it relates to source frequency and it relates to God, right? And this requires both the man and the woman to walk this path of reorienting with God, coming into a level of wholeness and sovereignty with themselves, which means, what does that mean? It means that we are not going to look for someone to save us. We're not going to look for romantic relationship as this only sort of spiritual salvation. Rather than a salvation, it becomes an amplification. We're looking for someone to amplify an experience that we've already created in our life. And so a very of the earth way to ground this is that you need to walk your hero or your heroine's path, or get on this path in order to even move into the sacred union timeline, or even prepare yourself for the sacred union paradigm, right? So it means you have to walk this path for a while of really being able to feel into your own energy and being able to come into a reorientation with source and God. And what that really means when we're moving into that reorientation with God or source, as a man, it means we're beginning to receive our divine masculine code. As a woman, it means you're beginning to receive your divine feminine code. And you're receiving it in the energetics and the realms of actual source frequency, right? So this is very much divine feminine, divine masculine. Women sort of reconnecting with the feminine oracle, men moving into more of this divine masculine sort of king, right? And so now on this path, we experience this rupture, or let's say rupture, or I think it's really important that we have real experiences in life of things not working out how we thought they would, right? So that's why when people talk about sacred union, but they haven't really been fucked over, they haven't really experienced having to hit rock bottom before, they haven't really experienced curveballs and pivots, then we're not really talking about sacred union, because there's a necessary amount of struggle slash excavation that's necessary to truly prepare the body for sacred union. And if we've never really had things not go our way, then the spiritual warrior has not been formed, right? So sacred union, you guys, is two spiritual warriors meeting in orbit. It's a divine feminine, divine masculine who have reoriented to God, who are meeting on the hero and the heroine's path. That's why it's very biblical. And they're meeting on this path, and they're beginning to walk and feel into sort of the energetics of a higher calling of their purpose, of whatever it might be, through their body and vessel. And then they meet each other in space and time, right? When they're both on the God timeline. So when people talk about like my sacred union, but you know, they're 25 years old, or they haven't really been ruptured, like had to face the deepest possible terror and fear in their body, not only their body, of all their ancestors' bodies. So what is necessary to prepare us for sacred union is we have to clear the ancestral field. If we don't clear the ancestral field, then we're talking about union, but we're not talking about sacred union or divine union, right? Because divine union, sacred union, is two people who meet on the other side of ancestral karma, right? Two people who have cleared the ancestral field, right? So their energetic space is really, really wide open. And so they're able to meet with this clearing that both of them have done. And the only way this clearing happens is through the path of the spiritual warrior, right? So both the man and the woman have to go down a path of spiritual initiation, of channeling the spiritual warrior, of her becoming the embodied oracle, of him becoming this spiritual warrior, this sort of energetic gladiator that he had to cultivate on his path. And so how do we become those things? We have to have an experience of life and death. And I don't mean we need to be like hit by a car and survive, or need to be in a plane crash, but we need to experience a death so profound in the nervous system, right? Again, this is where all aspects of our ego, all aspects of our yearning, of everything that we wanted, we thought was going to work out, and it didn't, right? And what this rupture does is it's the process of reorienting us to God, right? So before, we're like, oh, like I'm tapped into God, I'm tapped into the divine. Not really. Not until the rupture happens. When the rupture happens, now we really, really begin to walk the path of God. And this is where the crown opens, right? So the crown opens, and the crown doesn't really, really start to open until we really, really start clearing the ancestral field, right? So how open our crown is determining how open the energetic field around us. So if our crown chakra is really blocked, it means that we have so much ancestral karma that we're still holding in the field, right? And so we need this rupture that we go through, this experience where the ego kind of gets leveled a little bit, right? And we have to, and the reason why this is necessary is because this is actually where we learn to alchemize. This is actually where we learn to pivot. When you experience this really big nervous system death, where you're meeting the deepest trenches of terror and fear in your body, now you're beginning to move into more freedom, more divine energy, more Christ consciousness, because the canvas is totally clear. You don't really have any idea what's happening, but really what's happening is you're actually aligning to the deepest possible thread and cord of God in your body, but you had to go through that excavation to even be able to access this thread and cord in your body that you're now at, right? And this is the place where you're really working in the purest form of source energy, right? It's almost like that little knowing in your body. You had this little knowing, and it was always there. And now through this rupture, that knowing starts to move all through your body. Your whole body becomes all knowing, right? Maybe before the rupture, part of you was all knowing, right? Part of you was all knowing. But now as you experience this rupture, you become all knowing. You've opened the floodgates. This is where we can pivot. We can really move. This is where we can really move with source energy. We can pivot. We can alchemize. We can die and we can be reborn constantly. We can create, then recreate and recreate. But before this rupture, we're a little more fixed in our system. We kind of fight against things a lot more. The ego fights. The ego puts up a lot more of a fight. The ego and fear and terror is kind of holding on in still aspects of our life. But when this rupture happens, now God just completely opens in our space, right? And you can really tell when someone's gone through this type of experience, right? It means they're able to move through change a lot differently. They're able to move, and not in this sort of lack, sort of flexibility, bypassy, or not having a strong container, but they know how to find threads and cords of God in death. Like when things don't work out, they're like, I know there's possibility here. I know there's something that's being created, right? And so that's why this rupture, to some degree, it's preparing the system for the energetics of how God works, right? It's opening us up to an even different paradigm. And so what's happening here, you guys, and this is the truth, is that majority of the spiritual community is, and when we talk about twin flames karmic relationship, is actually, and when it talks about sort of the relational salvation, they're operating at a paradigm that is like pre-divine. It's not even the divine, it's not even in the God timeline yet, right? This is a very cutting edge sort of emerging paradigm we're talking about. Yes, there are couples out there, but there's not a lot of them. There's not a lot of them, this is a new emerging template. This is at the cutting edge of sort of spiritual work right now, and how spiritual work prepares us for this spiritual relationship, right? And this is the relationship that, even if we're not spiritual, everybody wants, right? Probably majority aren't prepared to do the work that's necessary, or are not meant to actually for their lifetime. But this is what everyone wants, right? At some level, part of their soul, this is the ultimate spiritual experience where you're literally in this total communion with God and source, where the relationship feels holy. It feels holy, right? And so most of this sort of spiritual industry, we talk about twin flames, is operating here. And this sacred union template is up here. It's in another paradigm. It's another step forward. It's another step forward, right? And I went through these crazy experiences that have opened me up to these paradigms. I may be a fucking lunatic, but that have opened me up to these paradigms that I've had to see and go through. And I've gone through them at such an acute sort of quantum pace that it's really sort of brought me into sort of this level of seeing things, And so, and I've learned that this rupture that we thought was salvation actually opens us up to the sacred union timeline. What it's really doing is it's opening you up to your God timeline. It's actually allowing you to live your God gifts here on the earthly soil, right? And so what happens as you sort of untangle from this sort of dynamic, or you experience this rupture, is you're actually learning, okay, there were a lot of ways that I was outsourcing my sovereignty, that I wasn't moving into my total sovereignty. Some ways that I was still living in sort of these codependent patterns. Some ways that my inner love addict was still running amok. Some ways that my fear was still sort of driving the ship. And as I experienced untethering from my karmic spiritual relationship, I really learned, oh, okay, it started to make a lot of sense of why that didn't work, of the work that I had to do on my own individual path to prepare me for the timeline of sacred union. And the best way we can explain the timeline of sacred union is it's your own individual God timeline. It's a place where you're grounded, you're connected to the earth, but you're also connected to magic. You're connected to the higher dimensions. Your left and right sides of your body are beginning to become somatically balanced, which means that you're living in your own polarity, that you're connected to both your own inner feminine and your own inner masculine. You've worked with a certain level of your mother and father wound to clear the left and right sides. And there's a balance that's been beginning to happen with your maternal and your paternal ancestors. So I call this ancestral polarity, which means that through this path that we're walking, we're also healing the karma of our ancestors, right? We're healing the karma of our ancestors, and we're actually clearing the whole ancestral field through our body by way of our crown beginning to fully open. And as this fully opens, now the field is totally clear. We're moving into this total communion with God and source energy. And we're beginning to walk the path, right? We're beginning to walk the path. And here is where our inner knowing is not some fraction of ourselves, it's the whole vessel. This is where a woman becomes the oracle. This is where a man becomes the oracle. Sacred union is when two oracles meet in space and time, right? It means two people with old souls who have this ancient capacity, have cleared the ancestral ancient realm in their bodies to retrieve all aspects of their soul here in time and place. And they have each bestowed their codes from God, the divine feminine code and the divine masculine code. And they're engaging in that code exchange with God and source. And then they meet in space and time and they begin to exchange codes with one another, right? And now relationship becomes this sort of upward swirl where these two people are both sovereign on their own. You know, they're two people who have moved into their total unique power of whatever it is for them in this lifetime in their body. They've moved into this individual power and they have met as a discernment to amplify each other, to bring each other deeper and raise each other higher than they ever could on their own. And so it becomes very much this situation where they're in their own wholeness, right? They're not outsourcing aspects of their power with each other, that they have alleviated themselves of their own suffering, right? So you really think about an important thing to ask yourself as you prepare for sacred union is, where are you still looking for relationship to take you away from some aspect of your life, or take you away from some aspect of your suffering or your stagnation, or some aspect in your own life that you haven't been able to cultivate and create for yourself? Maybe it's a sense of belonging, right? You haven't been able to create a sense of belonging. Maybe it's a sense of fulfillment that you haven't been able to, execute on your path to be fulfilled by what you're doing. Maybe it's that, you haven't healed your relationship to the masculine and you're looking for a man to come in and be able to pay for everything, to be able to, allow you to rest when you've never learned to rest on your own. And so it's really important to look of like, what haven't you cultivated inside of yourself? And you're looking for a relationship to bring you to a place, because essentially what sacred union is the manifestation of the higher self's relational template. So if you think about sacred union, it's if your highest possible soul connected energetic version of yourself in relationship. That's what we see when we think of sacred union. And so we think about, okay, and that's why so many people are like, I'm in a sacred union, but they haven't cultivated this individually on their own path yet. There's still layers that they have to peel back inside of themselves, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, what haven't we cultivated inside of ourselves that we're looking for this massive spiritual relationship to alleviate us from, to save us from in some aspect? And now what happens here is we take total accountability. Okay, I've really been living in fantasy in this way, right? Because a lot of it's fantasy, a lot of it's attachment, a lot of it's fear, that we're seeing relationship as sort of this paradigm of fantasy to some level, that all of a sudden this relationship can help me be on my ultimate timeline without having to create that for myself internally, right? And usually what happens is that's where we meet the karmic spiritual relationships, the twin flames, where we're not actually on the soul's highest possible timeline yet. We're still fighting aspects of ourselves. There's still layers that we have to unpack for our specific purpose. And then we meet this relationship that feels like the creation of the soul's highest timeline, but we can't ground it because we haven't done the necessary foundational work within ourselves to build the path as an individual sovereign being to move onto the soul's highest timeline. So Sacred union, you guys, there's a real element of practicality in these relationships. And so what happens is we often need to have at least one, maybe many sort of spiritual type relationships where it's like we feel this spiritual connection of some sort and it shatters. And then we learn, oh, and it's actually rupturing the fantasy that we place around relationships. True love begins when we enter reality. And so as these, the fantasies are sort of ripped off their pedestals, now we have to really, really come into a space of reality within our own body and how we approach relationships, right? Because sacred union is a relationship that can really exist in reality, in the practicality of reality of how your trauma and their trauma merge together. But it also has that potent spiritual connection. It also has that potent spiritual connection where you feel enlivened with one another. But what's happening is you both are taking radical responsibility for your side of the fence, right? Because we're not going to be perfectly healed when we move into sort of this sacred union template or this paradigm. But what we do need to be is we need to be on the path and on that timeline, which means we have to have moved onto our God timeline in our body, which really what it means is that you're living the most true, authentic, raw, vibrant thread and cord of your own soul and the God within you, and you're walking that path. That's when that timeline and that person will show up, when you're walking that path, right? Which means that you have to be living so authentically to what your specific given purpose is here on earth. And I'll tell you this, you guys, if we struggle to find this or we feel we're having to go through more lessons, it probably means that we're meant to live in a deeper authenticity than most. If we're having to go through so many different karmic type relationships and we're having to seemingly come up to so many lessons over and over, and I'm someone who's had to learn so many karmic romantic lessons, so many karmic relational lessons. And I know it's because it's a certain level of an embodied integrity and authenticity that I'm being asked to go into. And unfortunately or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, I've had to go through so many different lessons and ruptures and wrong turns and curveballs and situations to help excavate this level of authenticity for my own soul so I can live out my dharma and my God's work and ultimately find a relationship that it can exist at a certain level of authenticity and soul truth and soul connection that can really be held here on earth, right? So if you think about it, if you want to move into sacred union paradigm or this timeline, there's a certain level of soul authenticity that you're going to have to cultivate within yourself first. And along this path before you're ready, it doesn't mean that you can't have relational experiences that you're going to learn from, you're going to grow from and help build. But you'll really, really know when you're on this timeline, and you need to be really, really honest with yourself about knowing when you're on this timeline. You need to be really honest about what timeline you're on and where you are in that process, of preparing for sacred union. And it's basically like you take accountability for all aspects of our life, right? And you're able to really be walking that soulfully authentic path. And you'll know, and here's a big reason you'll know, you guys, is because things are starting to become easy, right? You're not having to fight uphill all the time. That's a big indication that you're moving on to your soul's highest timeline or the God timeline. You're learning more through ease, through flow, through pleasure, through joy. You're beginning to access more joy than you thought possible, and you're beginning to create abundance in your life, financial abundance, health abundance, community abundance, belonging abundance, more through ease. It's not this like fight uphill, because what you've done is you've excavated all this karma from your body, all this fear from your body, so you can finally allow things to be easier, right? And so this is the big thing. Karmic spiritual relationships, twin flames, they're really hard. We're fighting uphill. it's a really difficult dynamic. And the reason why it's difficult is because it usually means we're fighting timelines. It usually means that we're not yet on the soul's highest timeline, and we're experiencing some manifestation of the soul's highest timeline from an ancient realm and trying to make it work right now before we're actually ready. And then as we untangle and untether from that, we really see, oh, I had some work that I had to do. I had some excavation of certain fear in my body. I had some actions I had to take. I had some shifts that I had to make in my own life to really get on that soulfully authentic timeline in a way that could actually exist here and now, right? And that's why these twin flames, it's an element of fantasy, right? Because we're experiencing something that we're not yet ready to hold, right? It's like when you get like a really, really big vision for your life and you want to be at that vision already, but you have like a few years of these sort of micro steps that you have to go through to create something. And it's not probably going to look exactly like that, but to even get to that piece. And so it's like we're trying to get to that finished vision before we've moved through all the necessary steps and really trusted in our timeline. And so what really opens up here as we really prepare for the sacred union paradigm and timeline is that we're really, really beginning to trust our specific process. We're really beginning to trust what we individually have to do to move into our power. And we're not being influenced by things around us. We're just trusting in what our specific timeline is and what our specific relationship is supposed to be with God and Source, and how the energy of God and Source is meant to move through us for this iteration here on Earth. And when we fully surrender to that, we don't fight against it. We really take accountability for our work on that path, all the ways that maybe we're unhappy in our lives and we're looking for a relationship to take us away from that unhappiness. And we take full accountability and responsibility, all aspects of our shadow that maybe we haven't looked at, maybe we haven't integrated. And we're like, okay, I need to look at these things, all aspects of our little boy or little girl who is a love addict and is existing in fantasy, to be chosen to experience this incredible relationship of being seen, of being held, of being devoured, of being loved. And we see and we hold all these aspects of ourselves, and we learn to walk with God on this path. And we really, really trust what is leading to that authentic soul path for us and what we have to do. That's how we prepare for the sacred union timeline and paradigm. We're taking total accountability and responsibility from all our spiritual deliverance inside of ourselves and what we're creating. And we're moving into this newfound paradigm. And so as you prepare for sacred union, you're really learning how to work and trust God. It's like you have to learn to fully be in relationship with God before you can actually move into a relationship that is sacred union. Because sacred union is a relationship that is meant to reharmonize and recenter the balance of the divine feminine code and the divine masculine code through the art of love, through the art of lovemaking, through the art of ravishment, through the art of sacred sexuality, all these different pieces, right? But we need to fully come into communion with God on this path before we're even going to be able to see this person, right? And so as you move into communion with God, you're blasting wide open the ancestral field, the entire energetic field around you. Now you've healed and integrated the karma of your ancestors. And now you can actually see the sacred union paradigm, template, all beginning to form in the horizon. And you're beginning to walk on this paradigm and this timeline, and you're actually beginning to see this paradigm. But before that rupture, before that break in karma in the ancestral quantum realm, you're not even able to see this paradigm. You're not even able to see this paradigm. You're seeing maybe some microcosm of sacred union, more karmic relationship, maybe conscious relationship. But until this field blasts wide open, you're not even able to see the paradigm of sacred union. And so as it feels like you're losing everything, as it feels like you're having to start from square one, and you're moving into this space that's open, and it's endless possibilities for your life and whatever you can create. And as you move and trust in this, begin to walk down this path, now you're beginning to live your greatest soul authentic truth, and your energy is beginning to be of service to the world. that you're engaging with your energy in the most authentic way with the world and how you exchange with the world and the universe at large. This is how you move into the sacred union paradigm and timeline and template. And this is where you'll be able to vet, to be able to discern, does this other person, are they on a similar path? Are they on a similar timeline? Have they cultivated this level of sovereignty within themselves, right? So when you vet for someone, you're going to vet for a level of sovereignty. You know, is this person moved into a balance of their own masculine, feminine energy? Are they looking for someone to take care of them? Or are they looking to take care of someone? Or are they moving into this, are they in a total sovereignty of their container where they feel very sovereign in their own energy, right? And so you have to just ask yourself, and you're able to vet this depending on what you've created within your own body and vessel. You can be really honest. Is this person on a similar timeline to me? Or is this person living in a total different paradigm, right? And for me now in my journey, I'm at a point where without being like self-righteous about it or one's better than the other, I can just sense when someone's living in a different paradigm or is moving on a different timeline. I'm like, yeah, like that's not a fit, right? I'm really able to discern through the energetics and the energetics of the field, right? And this is where you really, really begin to find someone moving at a similar trajectory. And as you walk this path, now you're going to find that potent spiritual relationship, but it's not going to be such a struggle. And now you're recreating and reorienting a template for love that should feel like ease. It should feel like flow. That, you know, it shouldn't be contention all the time. Of course, we're going to have struggles. Of course, it's going to take hard work, but you should actually have the capacity to heal yourself or heal yourselves with one another. And so often in these karmic relationships, you keep looping and circling around the same pieces without really, really being able to offer one another that healing medicine. And in this sacred union, you're really able to amplify one another's souls and actually find an avenue to help one another heal. And it really comes from two sovereign people who are taking full responsibility and accountability for themselves and their work and whatever they need to do to step into their specific power for this lifetime. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. I've been talking for 57 minutes. I got to go record about 4 videos now. So I'm going to be speaking. So I need to conserve whatever more I have of my voice now. Yeah, let me know, guys, what you connected to from this live here in the comment section. You can respond with a comment. When will be able to watch again? It will be available as soon as it's done. So as soon as it's done, you can rewatch it. If you guys follow me on Instagram, I'm going to be sharing the link through my Instagram here in the next like 10, 15 minutes. But it'll be available to rewatch immediately. Once again, guys, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Like this video. I'm going to be doing lives every Monday and Friday, 12 p.m. Pacific. And again, any questions, anything that resonated, please let me know in the comment section. And you can comment even after this live chat is over in the comment section of the video. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning into this live, and wishing everyone a wonderful week. Take care.